Picture a room on the fourth floor of the Republic Pictures Administration building on Radford Avenue, Studio City, California. The date is March 7th, 1952. The time is 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The room holds 4 men. 3 of them are seated behind a mahogany conference table wide enough to land a small aircraft. They are dressed in charcoal wool suits, fresh from a Los Angeles tailor. They have lawyers on retainer, accountants in the building below them, and the combined institutional power of one of the most profitable independent studios in Hollywood. The 4th man is standing. He is 6 feet 4 inches tall. He weighs 220 pounds. He is wearing a denim work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, canvas trousers, and boots worn enough to show the shape of his feet. His hat is in his left hand. His right hand is open at his side. He has not raised his voice once in the last 47 minutes. But the 3 men behind that wide table have gone completely still. One of them, the one who made the offer, has a pen in his hand that he has not set down and will not set down, because setting it down would require him to make a decision about what just happened. The 2nd man is looking at his reflection in the polished tabletop. The 3rd man, the most senior of the 3, is staring at John Wayne the way a person stares at a door that opened from the wrong side. Nobody is speaking. The meeting has, in all practical terms, ended. What was asked in this room, what was offered, and what John Wayne said in response. Those 47 minutes would not appear in any studio record, any trade publication, or any authorized biography for more than 2 decades. The men who were present understood, without needing to agree on it, that some conversations are better left in the rooms where they happen. This is that story. To understand what happened in that room on March 7th, you have to understand what Republic Pictures was in 1952 and what it wanted from John Wayne and what it was willing to do to get it. Republic Pictures had been operating since 1935. By 1952, the studio had logged 17 years of production, hundreds of B-westerns, serials, and low-budget features, and a handful of genuine commercial successes, most of them carrying the name of one man. The lot at 4024, Radford Avenue occupied roughly 40 acres in Studio City, employing at its peak more than 1,100 people. Carpenters, costumers, electricians, wranglers, set painters, sound engineers, and the actors whose faces moved the tickets. The studio's gross receipts in 1951 were reported at just over $22 million. John Wayne Pictures accounted for a disproportionate share of that number, and everyone in the administration building knew it. The 3 men behind the table were not villains in the cartoon sense. That matters. Herbert Yates, Republic's founder and president, was 70 years old in 1952 and had spent nearly 4 decades building something from scratch. He was tough, methodical, and shrewd, a man who had started in tobacco distribution and pivoted to film processing before anyone had fully understood that the film business would outlast everything. Yates had built Republic on volume and efficiency, and he ran it that way. He was not a man who respected sentiment, but he was a man who respected results, and he had produced them. The 2 men flanking him were senior contract attorneys, both of them experienced in the specific architecture of Hollywood studio agreements. The morals clauses, the exclusivity provisions, the carefully constructed language that gave studios enormous leverage over the people whose names they owned. And sitting in the other chair at the table, the empty chair, the one that had been vacated before Wayne arrived, had been the conversation's real subject. Ward Bond. Ward Bond had been John Wayne's friend since 1929. They had met at the University of Southern California, both of them on the football team. Both of them knew to the idea that a camera might be pointed at them and that people would pay to watch. In the 23 years between that first handshake and this Tuesday afternoon in March, they had made films together, traveled together, argued fiercely over things that didn't matter and stayed silent together over things that did. Wayne had stood as best man at a gathering of friends after Bond's first serious relationship ended badly. Bond had driven through the night in 1942 to be present when Wayne's son Patrick was hospitalized with a fever no one could explain. The friendship was not sentimental. Both men were too hard-edged for sentiment, but it was as structural as load-bearing timber. It was simply part of how each man's life was built. In early 1952, Ward Bond had become a problem for Republic Pictures. The specifics are tangled in the political atmosphere of the period. The House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, the Hollywood blacklist, the climate of accusation that had been corroding the industry since 1947. Bond himself was a committed anti-communist who had cooperated publicly and loudly with WAC investigations. But the issue in March 1952 was not Bond's politics. It was Bond's mouth. Bond had made statements, in print and in the company of journalists, that implicated several studio executives, not at Republic but at competing studios, in financial arrangements that, if scrutinized, could expose Republic to collateral legal and reputational damage. Bond hadn't intended to do this. But he had, and now Republic's legal team had spent 6 weeks constructing a framework for containing the damage. That framework required John Wayne. Specifically, it required John Wayne to provide a written statement. Not a testimony, not a deposition, just a private letter, in which he would characterize certain of Bond's statements as the product of what the lawyers called diminished professional judgment. A polite phrase. A precise legal instrument. The kind of language that, in 1952, could end a man's career in a single afternoon. Yates had not called this a betrayal. He had called it a business necessity. He had brought 2 lawyers to explain why it was also, technically and legally, the smallest possible action required to protect the studio's exposure. He had arranged a financial incentive described in the meeting notes, later recovered from a personal archive, as a contract renegotiation favorable to Mr. Wayne, in the amount of approximately $18,000 above his current rate per picture. The meeting had begun at 1:30 p.m. At 2:17, with 47 minutes elapsed and no one behind the table having heard the word yes, one of the lawyers made the mistake of suggesting that the friendship between Wayne and Bond was, in the current climate, perhaps less of an asset than it once had been. That the association carried risk. That a man in Wayne's position might consider whether certain loyalties had simply run their useful course. And here's where it changes. John Wayne had been in the room since 1:30. He had been mostly quiet. He had listened to Yates make the opening argument, calm and structured, the case for necessity. He had listened to the first lawyer walk through the legal exposure. He had listened to the second lawyer explain the financial renegotiation. He had not interrupted. He had not argued. He had sat with his hat on his knee for the first 30 minutes, and then, when the second lawyer finished, he had stood up. Not because anyone asked him to. Not out of agitation. He simply stood, the way a man stands when he has decided that the conversation has moved to the part where he needs to be on his feet. He was 44 years old. 14 years since Stagecoach had made him a name that studios paid for. The intervening years had added mass to the frame that USC football had already built. Not fat, not softness, but the particular density that comes from physical work maintained without vanity. His hands, which he held loose at his sides, were the hands of a man who had spent years doing rope work with horses, hauling equipment on location shoots in Monument Valley in July, working through the physical demands of nearly 110 film productions without a stunt double for the scenes that mattered. He didn't hold himself like a man expecting trouble. He held himself the way a barn holds weather, present, structural, not worried about what comes at it. For 16 minutes after he stood, he said nothing that the lawyers remember clearly. Small acknowledgments. Brief questions about specific language in the proposed letter. His voice was low, not from effort but from habit. He had spent enough time on sets to understand that the people who needed to shout were usually the people who weren't sure anyone was listening. The lawyer sitting to Yates's left noticed something that he mentioned years later in a private letter to a colleague. He wrote that Wayne's eyes, during those 16 minutes, never moved quickly. That he would look at one person, hold that look for what felt like too long, and then move to the next. Not aggressive, the lawyer wrote. Clinical. Like a man reading a document he's been handed and wants to understand completely before he decides what to do with it. Then the second lawyer said what he said about Ward Bond. About loyalty running its useful course. Wayne turned to look at him. He didn't move the way other men moved when something has landed wrong. There was no sharp intake of breath, no shift in posture, no visible tell. He simply turned his head slowly until he was looking directly at the man who had spoken, and he held that look for a count of 3 seconds in complete silence. Nobody on that side of the table moved. The second lawyer, his name was Gerald Fitch, 38 years old, 8 years with Republic's legal department, a man who had successfully negotiated 34 studio contracts and had never in his professional career been looked at the way he was being looked at right now, cleared his throat and added a clarification. Something about the business climate. Something about protecting everyone involved. Wayne waited for him to finish. Then he said, quietly and without inflection, I understand what you're asking me to do. Yates, who was experienced enough to read rooms, leaned forward slightly. He said that no one was asking Wayne to do anything that wasn't in the interest of the studio, and the studio had always been fair with Wayne, and this was simply a matter of Mr. Yates. 2 words. Not loud, but Yates stopped. Inside, in the part of him that only the narrator can reach, John Wayne was conducting a very clear-headed inventory. Not an emotional one. An inventory. He was aware of the financial number on the table. He was aware of what the letter would mean for Bond. He was aware that the room contained 3 men who had structural power over his professional life and were exercising it with restraint and craft. He was aware that the legal language in the proposed letter was precise enough to accomplish exactly what it was designed to accomplish without looking, on its surface, like anything more than a private communication. He was also aware that Ward Bond had driven through the night in 1942. That there are certain debts that are not debts. They are just the architecture of who a man is. He was aware that if he signed the letter, he would wake up the following morning as someone he did not recognize, and that no amount of $18,000 per picture addresses the problem of not recognizing yourself in the morning. He set his hat on the conference table. This was the first deliberate action he had taken since standing. Fitch later recalled that the hat going down on the table was when he understood that the meeting was about to change character completely. I've been with this studio since 1931, Wayne said. That's 21 years. In those 21 years, I have done what was asked of me when it was reasonable and told you when it wasn't. What you're asking me right now is not reasonable. Yates began to speak. Wayne let him speak for approximately 4 sentences before continuing as though Yates had said nothing. Ward Bond has been my friend longer than most of the people in this building have had jobs. What's in that letter, he nodded toward the document on the table, is a way of using my name to damage a man who trusted me. I'm not going to do that. The second attorney, Fitch, made the error of noting that the friendship between Wayne and Bond had, as stated, become a professional liability in the current environment, and that Wayne might want to finish that sentence, Wayne said. Fitch did not finish that sentence. The room held the silence for what Yates's assistant, who was seated in the corner taking notes and whose account surfaces decades later in a profile piece, described as the longest 5 seconds I ever sat through in a professional setting. The producer who had quietly accompanied Wayne to the meeting, a man named Andrew McLaglen, then working as an assistant director on the Republic lot, had been seated to Wayne's left throughout. He leaned in and said in a low voice, "Duke." A single word. The kind of word a friend uses when he's trying to offer a person a graceful exit from something that's about to become permanent. Wayne looked at McLaglen. Then he looked back at the table. "I think we're done," he said. "What happened in the next 4 minutes is not a physical confrontation. That framing would be too simple and too easy and entirely wrong. What happened was something that requires a more careful accounting, because the demonstration John Wayne made in that conference room on March 7th, 1952 was not made with his hands. It was made with the one thing that the lawyers and the financial figures on the table could not account for, could not negotiate with, and had no framework to address. He did not leave. That's the thing. He did not pick up his hat and walk out of the room. He stood. He stayed exactly where he was. And in staying, he made the nature of the conversation visible to everyone present in a way that no argument could have achieved. In the first second after he said, "I think we're done," Yates opened his mouth. In the second second, Yates closed it again. In the third second, the first attorney, the quieter of the two, a man named Robert Ellison who had spent his career constructing language precisely to prevent moments like this one, looked down at the document on the table as though seeing it for the first time. In the fourth second, Fitch set his pen down. The pen he had been holding for 47 minutes. He set it down on the table in a small, definitive motion that he would not have been able to explain if asked. In the fifth second, the room went silent. Not quiet, silent. The particular silence of a space in which people have simultaneously understood that the ground shifted while they weren't watching. Wayne reached forward and picked up the document from the table. He held it for a moment, not reading it, just holding it, his thumb against the top corner. Then he set it back down with a slight turn of his wrist so that the text faced away from him. "I want to tell you something," he said. He wasn't looking at Yates. He wasn't looking at the lawyers. He was looking at some middle distance between the far wall and the window, The way a man looks when he's saying something he's been carrying for a while and has finally located the right room to put it down in. A man who'll sell out his friend to protect a contract isn't protecting anything. He's just demonstrating the price of everything he owns, including himself. And once you've demonstrated that price, once it's been written down in a letter and witnessed and filed, you can't take it back. You've told the world exactly what you're worth. Here is the authentic period context that makes this statement land with its full weight. In 1952, Hollywood's blacklist was not an abstraction. It was a mechanism. It operated through precisely the kind of private letters, informal communications, and quietly circulated characterizations that Republic's attorneys had brought to this table. Men and women who had been named, sometimes by friends, sometimes by colleagues, sometimes by people who had no real knowledge of them and simply needed to give a name, had lost careers, marriages, homes. The machinery required participants. It required people who were willing to provide the small, technically defensible inputs that aggregated, destroyed lives. Wayne was not making an abstract ethical argument. He was describing a specific operational reality that everyone in that room understood down to its operational details. Yates was quiet for a long time. He was a man who had spent 40 years reading rooms, and he was reading this one. "You understand," he said finally, "what this means for your relationship with this studio." "I understand what that letter means for my relationship with Ward Bond," Wayne said. The 4 seconds that followed were, by multiple accounts, the longest sustained silence in a professional meeting that any of the 4 surviving witnesses ever experienced. Then Wayne picked up his hat from the table. He put it on his head with the particular unhurried care of a man who has no reason to rush anything. He buttoned the second button of his work shirt, which had been open. He nodded once at the table, not at the men specifically, at the institution the table represented, an acknowledgement that was not warm and was not hostile, simply accurate. He walked to the door. He opened it. He turned back once, not fully, just enough to be heard. "I'll be on set at 6 o'clock Thursday." And then he was gone. Andrew McLaglen, rising from his chair, looked at the 3 men behind the table. He would describe what he saw years later in a single sentence. They looked like men who'd just been told the building was theirs, but the foundation had walked out the door. Ellison, the first attorney, picked up the document from the table. He held it for a moment. Then he placed it inside his folder and closed the folder, and did not open it again that day. Nobody said anything for almost 3 minutes. The meeting had ended. Herbert Yates left the building at 4:45 that afternoon and drove himself, which he rarely did, to a diner on Ventura Boulevard where he sometimes went when he needed to think without an audience. He sat in a booth for an hour and 40 minutes. He ordered coffee. He did not make calls. He had built Republic Pictures from a set of financial instruments and a belief that the American public would pay, reliably, to watch certain kinds of stories told a certain kind of way. He was right. He had been right for 17 years. And for 17 of those years, the most reliable instrument of that belief had been the man who had just walked out of his conference room. What troubled Yates, and this is documented in a fragment of personal correspondence surfaced in a 2003 archive, was not that Wayne had refused. He had anticipated refusal as a possibility and had structured the financial offer to address it. What troubled him was the specific nature of the refusal, the architecture of it. Wayne had not said, "I won't." He had said, "I can't, because doing it would make me someone I'm not." That distinction, Yates wrote, was the thing he kept returning to. "There are men in this business who know their price," he wrote to a colleague. Wayne apparently does not know his price. I am not sure, at this distance, whether that makes him stronger than me or simply different. 3 days after the meeting, Yates sent a brief written communication to Wayne's agent. The communication confirmed the existing contract terms unchanged. The proposed letter was not mentioned. The financial renegotiation was not mentioned. The meeting of March 7th was not, in the official record, referenced at all. Ward Bond never learned the full specifics of what had occurred. Wayne told him only that there had been some paperwork the studio wanted cleaned up, and that it had been handled. Bond, who was not a man prone to pressing for details, nodded and changed the subject. But Bond knew something. Not the specifics. The specifics remained between Wayne and the walls of that 4th-floor conference room for years. But Bond knew, in the way that men who have been friends for 2 decades know things without being told them, that something had happened. That something had been asked for and refused, and that the refusal had cost something. 6 months after the meeting, On a Sunday evening in the parking lot of a restaurant on Cahuenga, where the two men had dinner periodically, Bond said something to Wayne that he had apparently been carrying for a while. He said, "You know, there's a certain kind of friend who is willing to be inconvenient on your behalf. I think I have one of those." Wayne said nothing. He lit a cigarette. Bond looked at him for a moment, then looked away. "I'm not going to ask," he said. "Good," Wayne said. They finished their cigarettes. They went back inside. The quotable line, the one that survived, carried forward in Andrew McLaglen's memory and eventually rendered in an interview, was not the line from the meeting. It was a line Wayne said to McLaglen on the drive back from Republic Pictures that afternoon, when McLaglen asked him whether he was concerned about the studio's response. Wayne looked out the passenger window for a moment. Then he said, "The only thing a man really owns is his word about who he is. Everything else is a loan." McLaglen drove without speaking for a mile. Then he said, "That's going to cost you." "Already has," Wayne said. "Most things worth having do." Years later, Gerald Fitch, the attorney who had said what he said about loyalty running its useful course and had not finished the sentence when asked to, built a practice in entertainment law that became known, specifically, for an unusual specialty: contract negotiations in which the loyalty provisions were drafted with particular care. Provisions that protected, rather than leveraged, existing relationships between talent and their professional associates. His firm's reputation in this specific area was quiet but genuine, and the attorneys who trained under him would describe, when asked, a formative experience in an early case when they were shown how not to construct a negotiation. Fitch never named the case publicly, but colleagues who knew him in the 1950s described a change in his approach after the spring of 1952, a particular carefulness with the language of obligation, a reluctance to treat existing relationships as negotiating instruments. He used to say, one of his former associates recalled, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a negotiation is mistake a man's loyalty for a vulnerability. Because the man who has real loyalty isn't vulnerable. You are. Robert Ellison, the quieter of the two attorneys, left Republic Pictures in late 1953. He spent the remainder of his career in contract law, not entertainment. He was never publicly quoted on the subject of the March 7th meeting. He kept the closed folder. Herbert Yates continued to run Republic Pictures until 1959, when the studio's declining fortunes forced a structural reorganization. His relationship with Wayne became and remained professional, not warm, not hostile, functional. In interviews in later years, Yates spoke of Wayne with a particular kind of respect that was distinct from the respect he expressed for other major figures of the era. It was the respect of a man who had tested the load-bearing capacity of something and discovered it was greater than the test. Ward Bond died of a heart attack in November 1960. He was 57 years old, on location in Texas for a television production. Wayne, when he received the news, flew to Dallas and then drove the remaining distance to where Bond's production had been filming. He stood at the location for a while before the flight back. He did not give a public statement that week. He gave one the following month, in a brief paragraph that said only what was essential and nothing more. The friendship had lasted 31 years. It had survived arguments, distance, professional friction, and the particular strain of two large and opinionated men occupying the same industry for 3 decades. It had survived, in March of 1952, a conference room in Studio City where a piece of paper waited to be signed and was not. Now return to that opening image. 4 men in a room. 3 seated, 1 standing. A pen not set down. A hat on a table. A question left unanswered until the man who asked it could no longer remember, precisely, what he had thought the answer would be. What was asked in that room was common. The machinery of leverage, the financial instrument, the carefully crafted legal language. All of it ordinary, all of it used 100 times on 100 men in 100 meetings in the decades before and after March 7th, 1952. What was answered in that room was not common. It was the specific and irreducible thing that does not appear on a contract. 1 document, 1 refusal, 1 friendship that outlasted both. Not because John Wayne was without calculation. He was enormously calculated. He had survived and dominated the most calculating industry on earth for more than 2 decades. But he had calculated, in that room, the one figure that the men behind the table had left out of their accounting. He had calculated what he would lose if he signed the letter. Not in friendships, not in reputation, but in the specific interior knowledge of what he was made of. And he had decided, with the same plainness that governed everything he did, that the number was too high. 21 years in Hollywood, 110 films. And then Herbert Yates met John Wayne. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply demonstrated, with 47 minutes of silence and 4 minutes of clarity, what it looks like when a man has decided, once and finally, what he is worth. One word, one loyalty, one lesson that history almost forgot. But there was one friendship John Wayne protected that the studio never learned about. A debt that went further back than Ward Bond, further back than Republic Pictures, all the way to a cold set in 1930 and a favor that had no name attached to it. And the reason that story stayed buried for 50 years, that's a story for another time.